Hello, ladies and gentlemen. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about whether or not Robin SP replaces Cerydra. Now, I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. This video is only going to include two DPSs, and I'm sure you guys can all guess who these DPSs are, since they are basically the only two who actually care about Cerydra at all. Right? Of course, you can use Cerydra on other teams, however, I'm doubtful of the fact that she'd be best in slot over some of the other stronger options that already exist or are releasing upcoming. Right? So, Feainon and Anoxa. Now, let's talk about Anoxa first because this one's a little easier, right? A little easier for me. I predicted the second I laid my eyes on Robin's kit that she was incredibly strong. However, I hadn't really given much thought about, her replacing Cerydra until I believe someone brought it up in my chat in one of my live streams, in which after that live stream, shortly after, I then made a community post after thinking about it a bit more, saying, yeah, I do think Robin SP should be stronger than Cerydra, right? The reason for this is Anoxa is one of the few DPSs in the game who gives himself such a high amount of defense shred, right? He gives himself like, what is it, like 12% or 16% from his light cone? I don't remember the exact number, but all I do know is with the Genius set, his inbuilt defense shred that he gains from his kit, and his light cone, he caps out at 60% defense shred. This is like the highest amount of defense shred I've seen any character be able to get as a DPS on their own. And as you guys may know, defense shred becomes incredibly strong when you get to the later half, and once you hit near 100% or at 100%, it becomes extraordinary. And so with a Robin SP who gives a max of 40% defense shred at max vibes, she is legit perfectly synergistic with this Anoxa team. On top of this, her vulnerability buff is also quite nice as well, because on Anoxa's teams, nobody gives vulnerability except for maybe Cyrene if you have her light cone. But without that being the case, this means vulnerability buffing is actually highly valuable from one specific source, because you get 20% vulnerability, let's say. Well, actually no, now it's 16%. It got slightly nerfed. So he does 16% more overall damage straight up if you don't have a Cyrene with light cone, right? So you got 40% defense shred, you got 16% vulnerability, you also have 30% damage bonus from her technique. Yes, it only lasts 2 turns, but she never takes a turn again anyway, so it doesn't really matter, right? Her light cone isn't as needed in this case. In my opinion, her light cone's value is good in teams where characters scale off of speed, like Monorem, for example, or Silverwolf, right? Like, yes, you can use Robin SP with Silverwolf, and it's pretty good, especially if you have her light cone because of that speed buff, right? However, outside of these two teams, I'd recommend going into the Eidolon investment first, so don't stress about that too much. However, also the fact that she has her action advance and energy regen, right? Like, now sure, it isn't as consistent as, let's say Cerydra double skills in a Cyrene team in terms of providing extra actions. However, the main thing to notice here is the attack buffing that she also gives. Anoxa is one of the most attack-starved DPSs in the game who really appreciates that buffing. And believe it or not, Robin SP does give more attack buffing than even Cerydra, who is a mainly attack buffer, despite Robin's main buffing not really having anything to do with being an attack buffer, right? So she gives him some of his most, if not all, of his most desired buffs possible in order to increase his damage. And so this means, even though Cerydra does give more actions with the double skill and synergy with Cyrene, she still loses to Robin SP simply because Robin SP's buffs are on a completely different level from Cerydra, right? Now, let's add a few clarifications here, right? If you were to run, let's say, Robin SP plus Cerydra with her E1 together, this would cause some issues in this case. As I mentioned earlier, Anoxa can hit 60% defense shred completely on his lonesome. E1 Cerydra makes him be able to hit a total of 96% defense shred on specifically his double skills. This means that Robin SP's defense shred buffing on a team with E1 Cerydra basically becomes completely useless. So his sustainless teams will not benefit as much as his sustain teams, because in sustainless you'd obviously still run Cerydra, but there's some issues here if you own an E1 Cerydra in terms of synergy because of overcapping massively on defense shred, right? However, the next thing is that in these sustain teams, Robin SP is better with verticals than Cerydra alongside Cyrene. Now, yes, Cyrene gives Cerydra an extra 42% crit damage buff for the person Cerydra is buffing, so you can be like, yeah, her buffs are a little higher with Cyrene. This just doesn't change anything, right? Robin SP, once again, her buffs are just way too synergistic with Anoxa, so it just works absolutely perfectly. On top of this, Anoxa can take full advantage of her earlier Eidolons as well, so really it is just Robin SP being better than Cerydra on these teams, right? Now, if you already own an E1 Cerydra, would I say that you should now have to pull Robin SP for your Anoxa? Probably not, right? This is the part where I feel like I should clarify this. If you already have like an E1 or higher Cerydra, maybe her S1, maybe further Eidolons, you don't really need to bother, in my opinion, to try and replace her with Robin SP, because it's like, I don't know, to be honest, if Robin SP is still better than anyone Cerydra. I doubt it, right? But it is possible. It's possible. However, my thing is, it would be such probably a small jump, even in the case that it's maybe slightly better than E1 Cerydra, that I genuinely would not bother. I don't think it's worth it, and the only way you can really justify pulling Robin SP at that point is if you know that you can use Cerydra on another team, or you're pulling Robin SP for another team that isn't Anoxa's, in my opinion, right? So if you have an E1 or higher Cerydra, personally, I would not bother. So yeah, that's my thoughts when it comes to Anoxa's team. Robin SP is better than Cerydra, but I don't think she's worth pulling on for sustainless with E1 Cerydra teams, and I also don't think she's worth pulling on for replacing an E1 plus Cerydra, because it becomes an entirely different conversation at that point, in my opinion. Next, we move on to the one that, to be honest, I'm not completely sure on, but I'm still going to give my opinion anyways, right? You guys know I'm not a TCer. I don't do calcs. I don't do anything. I just read these characters' kits, and I try to predict / imagine. I don't play on private servers, right? I don't. The only thing I can do is watch other people's gameplay, and even then, I haven't even watched a single fucking gameplay replacing Cerydra with Robin SP on any of Feainon's teams, right? So let's get into this. Is Robin SP possibly a more important pull for Feainon than Cerydra, right? This is a little different from Anoxa's situation. Although Feainon has some self-defense shred with his Lycone, Feainon doesn't have anywhere near as much defense shred as Anoxa does. So even with a Robin SP, this guy kind of caps out at like 56, 58% defense shred at max on his teams, unless you have him S5 or you're using Cerydra or just another defense shred amper on the team, right? So when it comes to Faye, he cannot benefit as much of Robin SP's defense shred buffing until you have the combination of E1 Cerydra and E2 Robin SP. And this is where Feainon is different from Anoxa, in my opinion. You'll notice I said for Anoxa's team that E1 Cerydra and Robin SP kinda get in the way for each other in terms of being synergistic on an Anoxa team together, because they're just overcapping the defense shred too much. However, Feainon does not have this issue. He actually probably prefers a team of him, E1 Cerydra, Robin SP, and Cyrene all at the exact same time. So in my opinion, for the vertical investment lovers, Feainon here wins above even Anoxa, because he's actually really good at utilizing everything that these guys can give, including their verticals. The only issue that Feainon has with Robin verticals is the fact that her old E2 was moved to her E1 instead, and this E1 is that it records about like 20% of the total damage, or like 16%, but it only records half every time it hits, right? So it's like a 20% team damage jump. Basically, it records that much damage percent from whatever damage your team does, and then the birds will take action and then dish out that much damage. However, unfortunately, this does not work with Feainon and Cyrene teams, right? Because unless he dies and gets kicked out somehow, Feainon is never going to allow those birds to hit ever again, meaning that Robin SPE1 is completely useless in Cyrene Cerydra teams. So, to be honest, even though Robin SP's E2 is one of the strongest E2s in the game, I still would be skeptical about wanting to go for it on a Feainon team, just because you're having to put in automatically 2 cost in order to get anything of value from Robin SP's Eidolons to begin with. Now, let me stop dodging around this question. If you don't have Cerydra, is it better to get Cerydra, or is it better to get Robin SP for Feainon? Because yes, even though these two work completely fine together on the same team, and it's actually really, really good, is Cerydra more worth it still as a standalone pull than Robin SP for Feainon? I'm gonna go out on a limb and say no. Right? No. I don't think an E0S0 Cerydra is stronger than a E0S0 Robin SP. The buff difference is simply too large, and no matter what idiots say about double meteor, Cerydra's the only one who allows him to do a double meteor. Keep in mind, this double meteor does not happen for a majority of his meteors. This is something that happens rarely, and even with Cyrene on the team, further buffing Cerydra's capability of doing double meteors more often, even then, it's still slow, and it still doesn't happen on a majority of the meteors. So what this means is, sure, a double meteor is good. It is a benefit to Feainon. However, let's say you have 2 meteors that do 1.4 million damage versus every single meteor you do, even without double meteors, does, let's say, 2+ million damage, right? Sure, for that one instance of double meteors, you're technically still 800k damage above a 2 million meteor, but this 2 million damage meteor is able to happen every time he does one, instead of every 4 to 5 attacks that he does, like Cerydra's restriction. So this, in my opinion, is why I believe Robin SP is better than Cerydra. Right. Now, Cerydra will probably get a Nova Flare in the next version. Maybe, it's not guaranteed, you know? And if you have Cerydra, once again, you can obviously still make use of her. But I do think that Robin SP, with her buffs, is probably a better pull for Feainon in comparison to Cerydra. And it's also just like a 10 to 100 times better pull for the rest of your account as well when you're able to move Robin SP to other teams, because Cerydra just isn't anywhere near as valuable as a generalist as Robin SP is. Let me know your guys' thoughts down in the comments. Hope you have a great day. Hope you have a great night. Peace out.